So thank you. If this is your second day coming back to the Project Success Summer Institute, welcome back. We had just an incredible session yesterday for our educators, administrators alike, around inclusive practices in action. Just wonderful feedback and great participation from participants like you. So I want to say thank you to those of you that this is day 2. For those of you joining us today, welcome. We are so happy to be kicking off another day of our Summer Institute with a particular focus around you as the leader. Whether you are a special education director, whether you're supporting at the university level, whether you're a teacher leader and just looking for more strategies and tools, today is designed for you. I also know that it's hard to determine which session to attend at conferences like this. So please note that everything that is being provided in all of our sessions for the Summer Institute, both educator and administrator, are recorded and will be up on the link that Christine just shared in the chat box. So projectsuccessindiana.com, and you just visit the Summer Institute 2021. You can click on any of those presentations. They come as icons there on your screen on the website. You'll have access to all presentations and all recordings that we have, and we'll have those up in the next few days. So let's go ahead and kick off today. We have a lot of information to share, and as always, there's never enough time. So we're gonna get started. This session in particular is the implementation of high leverage practices, with the focus on how do we leverage our high leverage practices for new teachers and in-service teachers that are moving into our buildings as first, second, and third year teachers. And how do we fuse those with our established or our goals for inclusive practices as a district, as a school, or even as a classroom team? So today we'll focus around those particular pieces. A few housekeeping things as we kick things off. We're going to ask that everyone stays on mute and off camera just to assure that we have plenty of bandwidth. We will be opening up the chat box at all times for questions. So if you have a question, if you have a strategy, a tool, a resource that you are using locally, please share it there. That's what it's for. And then I'll hang out for about 5 minutes after the session to answer any questions that you might have, particular about the high leverage practices or about anything that's been provided around the inclusive practices and the resources that we have available. We will also ask that you complete an evaluation at the end of today's session, and we will walk you through that. We will complete one after every session, and we really value that feedback. We look at every single one of them at every single evening of our institute. So we reviewed it last night and we'll review it again tonight, and we change and adjust as needed based on that feedback. So without further ado, we have individuals from diverse districts, we have individuals from diverse states. We want to know who you are and we want to welcome you. So if you have just a moment as we proceed forward, if you would share your name, your school, your state, and your role in the chat box. And then if you feel comfortable doing so, please share something you're hoping to learn. You can share a personal or professional celebration. I know this year has been a challenge for each one of us, so please share those celebrations so we can amplify those. And then if you're doing something fun for summer, my vacation isn't until September, so I will live vicariously through each one of you. So if you would just take a moment and share that if you feel comfortable, but if anything, please share your name and your school, district, and state. If you're from outside of Indiana, please share that as well. So just open the chat box, and anytime you see this icon here at the top, we are going to be using the chat box. So thank you, Eric, welcome. We have Allison from Virginia, welcome. Perfect. And if you feel comfortable, share a celebration. If you don't, I just love to know who you are and where you're joining us from today. We'll wait about 30 more seconds. Hey, Jackie. I'm seeing lots of familiar names and some new, hey, Kara, and some new individuals. So thank you for joining Project Success today. All right, Christine will continue to add the prompts there. If you would share your name, your district, and your role, your state as well. We have our Houston team here. Wonderful to see always. Just a quick introduction to myself. My name is Meredith Keating Merck. I was a special educator for 8 years. I was a building level administrator for 3 years as a dean of students, as well as a special education coordinator. I am an instructor currently at the University of Evansville. I teach mild interventions, I teach intense interventions, and I support the behavioral and emotional behavioral course as well. And that is my alma mater, as well as Butler University, if you're Indiana focused. So I'm so happy to get back and provide supports for our pre-service teachers here in Indiana. I am and have been a subject matter expert for Public Consulting Group for 6 years now. Project Success fits within Public Consulting Group. That is our company, and I love what I do. I love being able to help support teachers and leaders alike, throughout Indiana and beyond. So it's wonderful to have each one of you today. Please continue to share just a little bit about yourself in the chat box. I always like to see that. If you are not familiar with Project Success, I just want to take a quick second to introduce Project Success to you. So Project Success is a resource center to support educators of students with significant intellectual disabilities. You may hear us transition between cognitive or intellectual. We use those terms interchangeably, but we're speaking around the same students. We provide professional development across a variety of topics. If you have the slide up in front of you, you'll see those topics, and in a number of formats. So we use online tools, we use something called Playbook to help connect teachers and leaders together. And we provide virtual trainings like we're doing today so that we can connect teachers from across the state of Indiana and beyond to share strategies, tools, and just their specialty to bring together and share that out. So just wanted you to know a little bit of background to us, and you can look through that. Although today is specifically, and we'll use the term teachers of students with significant disabilities, the content that I am sharing through the high leverage practices is applicable to all of your teachers, your general educators, your special educators, all of your colleagues, at the school level. This is appropriate for you. And I want you to think about how you can leverage it across multiple educators and multiple roles. Additionally, we will be having a session today at noon Eastern time to talk a little bit about next steps with Project Success and really the use of our Playbook system. A Playbook is a learning management system. We use it to bring teachers together. They log onto the system. They have collective groups that they collaborate with, as well as personalized coaching from Project Success, and additionally, virtual professional development directly with our staff. So we have a special education teachers playbook with personalized coaching and professional development, and we have emerging teachers, teacher leaders. So that's something that we're very proud of, that work. And so you can learn a little bit more today at noon. I also encourage you to reach out to any one of our team members. Our emails are here. They're also on the website, and feel free to connect with anyone from the team. If you've been attending the sessions these last few days, you've met several of us. So also, I encourage you to join our social media. Today is a nice way to connect. We're going to hear lots of ideas. We're going to hear ideas from various states. We're going to hear ideas from various districts. And we're going to hear lots of positive statements and opportunities that validate inclusive practices. So we would love for you to share that on social media. Whether you're on Twitter or Facebook, you can choose which platform you feel most comfortable, but we just ask that any lessons learned, any next steps, any highlights from a great presentation or quotes from presenters, we would love for you to share it here. So our Twitter page is @ProjectSuccess4. Our Facebook page is Project Success IN for Indiana. And we just encourage you to continue to engage there. And we'll be sharing lots of opportunities. We share research-based articles, any professional development that's up and coming through our social media as well. So we just encourage you to join in that platform, on those platforms, and continue to engage with us, as well as our website. And thank you. Those of you who are just logging in, please continue to introduce yourself in the chat box. We always like to see who's here with us, and more specifically what your role is, the state that you represent. So please continue to share in that space as well, and ask questions as we move forward. So let's get into it. I know that our time is fleeting, so we're going to maximize our time today. So in this particular session, we will be looking at high leverage practices and why they are important for special educators, not to mention all the educators that you are coaching, general educators, your new teachers especially, your inclusive teams of general and special educators. We're going to talk about the impact of how we can implement high leverage practices, and our conversations will really focus around tools, resources, and some takeaways that you can be implementing in your own classrooms with your own educators, and that you can be sharing at your professional learning community meetings. You can be sharing them at staff meetings. You can fuse them into your own professional development to really make an impact on student learning. So we encourage you to also jump onto our Padlet, and I will show you that in a minute. Christine will be adding that to the chat box in just a moment, and if you scroll forward, you'll find it as well. Another thing to think about is we encourage you always to be thinking about how this affects your own leadership role and the needs of your own teacher. So if you are already engaged in utilizing the high leverage practices, we encourage you to share out your perspective, your backgrounds to it, how you're supporting and encouraging educators to engage in that way using the high leverage practices. Our objectives align directly with that, exploring tools and resources and making sure that you have various ways to have access to those resources, and then developing next steps. I really want you to think through, this introduction will be provided today, but how do we and when do we implement at the local level? And being able to think through what that looks like for your educators. How many new teachers do you have? How could you fuse this into some of your, your mentorship programs or your PLCs for your new educators? Engagement strategies, we'll be using Chatbox, we'll be using Padlet, and I have a poll or two hidden in here if I can remember when I need to pull them up. So Padlet, Christine just added it to the chat box, and I just wanted to be able to provide you a quick walkthrough to it. All of the resources that I'm going to mention today in our session around the high leverage practices are here. You may always make a copy of this Padlet and or just access this link right here and have access to all the resources and tools. Please introduce yourself and please feel comfortable sharing here. I have included introductions to high leverage practices here, all of the intro information that you need around each of the practice areas. I've included high leverage practices tools and the leadership guides. These are key. We're going to talk about them here in a minute, but the leadership guides are so helpful to you as a leader to be able to take away some of these key 22 high leverage practices and make them happen in your district. I love them. I use them with our teacher leaders. I use them at the university level, and it just allows me to think through some guiding questions, and they're already there for me. So I just need to think through, how does this fit into the professional development that I'm providing? We'll go through them here in a minute, but you have access to all of them here. Additional resources around inclusive practices. That's why we're here today. And I've found all of the inclusive practices materials from Project Success that align directly to collaboration and data collection. So you're going to have all of that here. If you've attended our 2020 session, these are going to look really familiar to you, but I wanted you to have them, and I wanted you to have them all in one spot. So they're here. I've also engaged in some of the questions, added some of the questions that we're going to engage in today. It's all right here. Feel free at any point in time. All you have to do, click the plus button. You can type your question here. You can upload, like an email, a link, a document, just like you would an email, like a Word document, Excel. You can even include a picture. If you have a document that you're using, you can snap it right there so that you may interact with this in all ways. I do want to delete that post. You can also delete posts if you mess up. And then lastly, our next steps. Anything, I want you to take a minute to reflect. I want you to think about the impact on your own teachers, and this gives you a space to do it. Same way, clicking a plus sign. If you have resources, you may add them directly to this Padlet. It is designed for interaction, and it is designed for you to have a one-stop shop for all of the links following today's presentation. So you don't have to surf through the presentation, the PowerPoint, but they're all in the PowerPoint too. As well. So I'll be referring and pulling up the Padlet throughout today's session just to reference it as well. So let's just dive right into the high leverage practices. I want to share the 4 key areas. So the high leverage practices were created in partnership with the Cedar Center, so Collaboration for Effective Educator Development, Accountability and Reform, so Cedar, and the Council for Exceptional Children, CEC. And they developed and published this set of high leverage practices, or HLPs, for special education teachers and teacher candidates. But the truth is they're applicable for all of your educators whom you support, new, even your veteran. And they're organized around 4 key areas. So that's why on this slide I have assessment, I have collaboration, instructional practices, and social, emotional, and behavioral. The 22 high leverage practices are embedded in one of these 4 categories. They're the key areas that we know that these 22 high leverage practices can address those most critical areas in K through 12, special education and beyond. And once they're mastered and able to be demonstrated, they make a gigantic impact on student learning and collaboration between educators. These are 22 that are divided between them. Collaboration only has 3 though, and we're going to spend some time with collaboration today because it's a great spot to jump into, and it aligns directly with our inclusive practices. These 4 categories in the 22 practices within have been shown to really support and improve student outcomes when they're successfully implemented. So we want to be strategic about selecting them and really diving into them. And I'll show you how they're divided here in just a minute off the Padlet. The other thing to think about is the high leverage practices came to us because of the rapid changes in special education, especially this last year. I think you could probably accelerate that by 10 this year. And so teacher preparation programs have struggled to keep up and there's been an increased demand for instructional support. And this is a way to help support our new educators and our veteran teachers who maybe have moved into a new position to help support their day-to-day practices around collaboration and instruction and social emotional learning and assessment. So 4 key categories, 22 practices embedded in each. And I would like to open that in just a minute and show you what this link here, the 22 aligned resources, look like. But first, I just want to give a second, and I'll jump back to this one. I want to give a second just to hear how you're leveraging, or if you're leveraging the high leverage practices and your level of knowledge with those. This will help me kind of gear what we need to share today, and then any additional resources that we can share. So if you would, in the chat box, just share your level of knowledge on the high leverage practices, or the HLPs. You could be expert, you could have a foundational knowledge, you could be newly introduced as well. There's no wrong answer here, but I do want to hear kind of where you are in the process. And while you do that, I'm going to pull up the HLP page with the 22 practices so that we can look at that together as well. So are you an expert? Is this newly foundational knowledge? Okay, newly introduced, foundational, great. Okay, perfect. Newly introduced, excellent. All right, keep those coming in. And I want to share with you just this introduction to the high leverage practices and some resources that will help get you there. So this is the HLP page, and it just gives you an introduction to each of the 4 areas. And when you select them, it breaks down specifically what are those practices that teachers need. So this allows you to see HLP number 1, collaborate with professionals to increase student success. And then once you select it down, it gives you more specifics. We're going to explore 1 through 3 today because I know that it directly overlaps your work with increasing inclusive practices in your district, that collaboration between your general educators and your special educators. As you look through it, it gives you additional information to collaborate with gen ed teachers using effective collaboration behaviors. So we have, the sharing of ideas, the active listening, questioning, negotiating that comes with really having active listening and active engagement and collaboration. The goal with your HLPs is to introduce a few at a time to really build the foundation for your teachers and have them working and modeling for you as the leader, modeling these high leverage practices within other professional development that you are providing. So, the participation, HLP2, organize and facilitate effective meetings. Our teachers need explicit instruction in how to do that, whether it's an IEP meeting, whether it's a service plan meeting, even meetings within inclusive practices between our co-teachers, we have to explicitly teach these meeting behaviors. And even things as simple as creating our agenda and our objectives have to really be taught explicitly to our educators. And so this validates and really helps you build within those 22 practices, build your teachers' repertoire, helps them build and include and be more specific with their information to be better educators, to serve their students, and be better collaborators to serve their teams and their students in a more effective way. So again, this page is probably one of the most visited pages on the High Leverage Practices website. It breaks down each of the 4 practice areas and gives you just additional information. If you're a teacher leader and you're on today and you're coaching pre-service teachers, you're having the teachers with you and you're modeling. If you're a special education director and you're accepting pre-service teachers and you're helping develop programs for them, this is a place to visit. These are areas that you can be explicitly teaching for your educators. So I wanted to share that. That is what is linked directly. Thank you for participating in the poll as well. And this is also added onto the Padlet. So this information here takes you directly there. So you have and can explore each high leverage practice, both for yourself and within your teams as well. Another thing that is provided on the Padlet, and we're not going to spend the time watching it today, we just don't have the capacity, but it brings up some really important pieces, is the Introduction to High Leverage Practices video. It includes some of the most essential elements of the high leverage practices. It talks about the commitment and hard work and the practice that we need to provide for our educators in implementing these. And it talks about the careful support and coaching that needs to be provided. And we know as teachers start to build these skills, they are going to have and support new teachers in a way and their students in a way that really brings about next steps and intention and fidelity with implementation. If you are working really at designing out your data-driven interventions, this is not designed to replace, it is designed to complement. So they're appropriate for all teachers and designed to add just a complement to maybe your intense professional development, your intensive data-driven interventions that you're utilizing. It's just designed to complement. So as we move forward, let's look at just a few additional resources. I said I had several for you, and I didn't hold out on that. So the first thing that we have is about our HLPs. This is an introduction to the high leverage practices in special education. It was the site that we just visited. And then what I did from there is I broke down the 4 areas of practice. So you have your assessment, you have your collaboration, and you have your instruction, social, emotional, and behavioral resources right there. Wanted you to have them in 2 spaces. So you have that in the presentation as well as on the Padlet. Additionally, I wanted to take a moment for us to start to connect the high leverage practices with the inclusive practices that you've been working on these last few years with Project Success. With your own teams and implementation. If you joined in 2020, you're going to recall that in our Summer Institute of 2020, we shared out the Project Success Inclusive Practices Framework. And this does a nice job walking you through how we implement inclusive practices within your teams and how we start to make change at the local level, and even the classroom and PLC level of implementing inclusive practices. I want to show you really where that overlaps and where you can fuse in as you're working with your inclusive practices teams, where you can fuse in some of the high leverage practices and really increase those high leverage practices to support your inclusive practices. So first of all, within the inclusive practices framework, we establish that need for change. What is our goal? What are our objectives? Why do we need to have more inclusive practices for students with significant disabilities or students with disabilities in general? This is really where we establish the why. This is where it becomes very specific around our students and the outcomes that we're hoping to bring for all students, especially those with disabilities. Gathering our guiding team is an essential piece, making sure that we have the right individuals at the table. Our pre-service teachers will be jumping right into this process. And so we need to help support that, and they'll be members of these guiding inclusive practices teams. And so having those collaborative HLPs built will really support and influence that. Creating the vision, and this is an evolution of your vision for all kids with inclusive practices. We know that we not only create that vision, but we have to share it school-wide, classroom-wide, district-wide, and beyond. So having that vision established and having that shared throughout your building is essential. Taking action and really putting together those really important pieces, the meetings, the collaborative and instructional practices that really make up your inclusive practices is where we have that action plan taking place. Making sure that we're securing small wins throughout. This is so important for our staff to be able to celebrate even the smallest win that we can have for our students, making sure that students feel encouraged, making sure that we're amplifying the greatness of our inclusive practices, and making sure that when we need to, we're constantly reflecting, we're constantly revising and adjusting our plan as it moves forward. And then it becomes the norm for us in our inclusive practices and within our building. Where we align those high leverage practices comes throughout this process, but specifically it comes through collaboration, and it comes through making sure that everyone on that gathering team can interact, can facilitate the meeting, can have those collaborative actions all in place to help support the process. And that's where this really comes into place. To build our inclusive teams, we have to fuse those high leverage practices into every aspect of our planning, our assessment, and our interactions as a team, making sure that everyone on the team is knowledgeable and able to implement those high leverage practices with fidelity to help build out a more effective, inclusive team. And so therefore, I wanted to highlight just a few that stood out to me. So in collaboration, high leverage practice number 1 is to collaborate with professionals to increase student access. The more we can help develop that in our educators, the more we help build our inclusive teams. HLP number 4 under assessment, under the assessment practice, is to use multiple sources of informed information to develop a comprehension understanding of a student's strengths and needs. That comes as we're reviewing data within our inclusive team. The more we can build this as a high leverage practice amongst our team, the better outcomes we will have at having those multiple data sources to review student strengths and areas of need. And then another one that always stands out to me are those instructional practices. The majority of the high leverage practices fits within instruction. That's not a surprise to this group in any way. But a couple that stand out to me as I think through the inclusive practices framework. HLP, high leverage practice number 11, to identify and prioritize long and short-term goals, is an essential component of what we do within our inclusive practices framework. It is specifically what we do after we develop our vision as an inclusive team. So having that opportunity and really teaching that skill and modeling that skill to our teachers is essential. And then always looking at systematically designing instruction towards the learning goal. So I wanted to show that as we develop out and support our high leverage practices, we're being very intentional about building that within our inclusive teams and our guiding teams alike. So always go back to our inclusive practices framework as you're working through these high leverage practices with all of your teachers and seeing how it influences and really supports your inclusive practices as you're developing those out. So just a couple of questions I want you to reflect on. You can add these to the chat box if you feel comfortable, but be thinking about how your team of educators, as you're supporting your teams of teachers, how they could be or where they are within the inclusive practices framework, as well as how you could support the high leverage practices very intensely and intentionally with your teachers. So just take a moment. This is going to be a self-reflection. You can add it to the chat box, but be thinking about where are you in the inclusive practices framework, and then how could you fuse in some of these high leverage practices, intentionally teaching them to your educators, especially your new educators, to really support your inclusive practices. This is something that I want you to be just thinking about in all ways. You can add it to the Padlet if you feel comfortable. Feel free to add it to the chat box, but I do want you to be keeping those questions in the back of your mind as you're moving forward. So as we kind of move forward, I want to jump into 3 specific HLPs that I think you can be implementing as soon as you have your teachers back together, whether that's through summer training, whether that's in the fall. You can be implementing this with your new teacher candidates and any of your new teacher mentoring programs that you implement. If you're in Indiana, the Department of Education provides the high leverage practices book to all new teachers. I know the special education directors can request the text, which breaks down each of the high leverage practices and gives just tips and tricks to educators in implementation. So that's a nice thing that, a wonderful thing that our Department of Education provides here in Indiana to help support new teachers. So we're going to look at high leverage practice number 1, to collaborate with professionals to increase student access. We're going to look at HLP number 2, organize and facilitate effective meetings. And we're going to look at slightly at collaborating with families to support student learning. These leadership guides are not only here in the presentation, they are also linked on your Padlet. They, to me, are the most useful resource that the high leverage practices documents have. Out of all the resources that are there, this to me stands out as the most helpful. I mentioned it earlier in the presentation, and I just wanted to highlight it again. It is on your Padlet as well, and Christine just added that to the chat box so you have access to that. But I encourage you to explore that. I'm going to break one down for you today. So let's take just a closer look at high leverage practices 1 through 3. and how we really help develop effective educators and staff alike. Paraprofessionals are included in this as well, your related service staff as well. Anyone who's collaborating needs to have these high leverage practices as a tool in their tool belt, especially 1 through 3. So being able to collaborate with a wide range of professionals, families, and caregivers, making sure that we're allowing for a varied expertise and perspectives about a student to be shared, and making sure that we're seeking input from all stakeholders. And that includes making sure that our general educators are at the table when we're speaking to students and about students, making sure that we have specific feedback from our families, from our caregivers alike, to help have that expertise and those perspectives around that student and their needs. And then to be able to utilize and use effective communication skills as we're collaborating with others. We know that when there's a breakdown in effective functioning of a team, it often goes back to communication. There's been a breakdown in communication amongst the team. And we have to always and in all ways consider the background of who we're collaborating with. We need to be considering culture, the language of not only our families, but the staff who are supporting the support of the student, our families and our stakeholders alike. So making sure that we're being effective in our communication skills and making sure that we're providing it in multiple ways as well. As we look through HLPs 1 through 3, I would love for you to just reflect on where your staff, especially your new staff, your new teachers, are really accelerating the most in 1 through 3. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the poll up. It'll take me just 2 seconds. Actually, I'm not. So I'm going to put it, Christine's going to add this question to the chat box really quickly. But if you would just take a moment, reflect here. Which collaboration, high leverage practice do your teachers excel in the most? Are they really excelling in HLP 1, collaborating with professionals to increase student access? Are they really leading meetings effectively amongst families and professionals alike? Or are they collaborating with families in a really effective way? So just take a minute. Where are your teachers excelling the most? And feel free to add why. I would love to see that as well. So where are they excelling the most? HLP 1, collaborating with professionals. HLP 2, leading effective meetings. Or HLP 3, collaborating with families. Kira says, I feel like we're doing HLP 1 and 3 the best, and we need to work on HLP 2. Okay, absolutely. So those effective meetings. And that's really a piece that we're going to look at. What are some strategies for you as leaders in the building, administrators in the building? How can you kind of help facilitate 1 through 3 in a way that helps support things like the schedule and some things that you have control over to help increase that? HLP 1, collaborating with professionals, awesome, excellent, thank you. Making sure that we're able to increase that student success. Having that HLP down then leads you directly to 2 and 3. You know, it's HLP, high leverage practice 1, for a reason, because it influences all that we're doing. Jen says, I feel like we're doing HLP 3 well, and we need to work on 1. Excellent. HLP is a relative strength. We need to remember to better utilize the expertise in the room rather than passive participation. Thank you. That is a profound piece. And it really highlights making sure that we're leveraging that shared responsibility, that we're really having everyone, giving everyone, every stakeholder, families, professionals, and leadership alike, that space to share and leverage that expertise. So thank you for bringing that to the front. And feel free to continue to share. And some of you have already done this, but areas that you need some support. I know some of you mentioned we really need to go back to the high leverage practices 1 and go back and really build and support our teachers in that area. And thank you for reflecting on this. If there's an area that you need to continue to focus on, you can reflect on that personally, or you can add it to the chat box. This is a a supportive and safe group to do that. But let's go on ahead and jump right in to supporting our staff, specifically with HLP1. And I pull high leverage practice 1 because it goes back to those foundational pieces. It influences all the other HLPs 2 and 3, but also your ability to work together to collect data, your ability to work together to implement an instructional high leverage practice as well. So I like to start here, and I would love for you to continue to explore that. So supporting staff with communication skills within high leverage practices 1, making sure that active listening is taught and modeled by you as the educator, really holding and teaching our staff to be so intentional with their nonverbal active listening. Facial expressions matter. It speaks. If you attended our communication session yesterday, over 50% is that nonverbal communication. So it matters. It matters how we as leaders support our teachers and how we model our nonverbal active listening, and as well as teaching our teachers how to implement that strategy with families and with each other to really value each other's opinions in that way and to leverage the importance of really being active in that meeting and really valuing that support and that feedback and that perspective from a colleague. Using open-ended questions to make sure we're on target, making sure that we're using statements that are accurate and descriptive, and then modeling communication skills in action. And that really comes to us as leaders to make sure that we're setting up, we're fusing in this in our norms before a meeting, we're fusing this in as we're developing out our inclusive team, so that these are pieces that are really built in and established into our meetings, our structures, and our norms as we move forward. Another area is group problem solving. I do have a slide in here. I won't have as much time to go into that, but in the leadership guide for HLP1, they go into this. So it is available to you, and I'll leave you with that as well. Here are some really important questions that you can be using with your teachers to help guide them towards their self-reflection around high leverage practices 1. These can be fused in again as you're coaching one-to-one with your teachers. You can be fusing this in to start of the school year professional development for new teachers, and you can be making sure that you're implementing this in any type of staff meeting that's possible. The more times you're having teachers reflect on this, the better. How can you show individuals whom you collaborate with that you're actively listening? Having teachers write out and specifically reflect on this makes it very intentional. How can you rephrase questions? How can you ensure communication messages are received as intended? How can you follow up on those? As, I won't say if, but as conflict or disagreement arises, what strategies can you use to mend the situation? These are great guiding questions. These can be implemented in small groups, or when you pull together your guiding inclusive practices team, you can work through this as a team to establish what that will look like within the team. And also what that looks like amongst the team. So if you have 2 colleagues, this is important for them to talk about what and how active listening looks like, what and how we can really manage our messages back and forth between each other, and make sure that they're received as intended. Just being so intentional with that is so important. This is underneath the inclusive practices section of the Padlet, but they're linked here again as a secondary link so that you have access to this. This is all of our inclusive practices teaming templates. It doesn't necessarily align directly with those guiding questions, but creating the vision is an important piece. Creating a collaborative plan includes much of what those guiding questions include. There's just overlap between our inclusive practices content and our templates and those elements that I just shared with you. So I wanted you to have those and be able to explore them on your own time. Just a couple of other pieces as your teachers are co-planning for success, making sure we're focusing on instruction, making sure those instructional objectives are at the forefront of everything that we're doing, UDL is implemented, and that we're choosing those correct instructional strategies to support, making sure when you're forming your teams and you're having your teams collaborate, that we're clarifying roles and responsibilities. Materials, resources, and modification needs, that is discussed ahead of time. It doesn't always fall on our special educators. Our gen ed teachers just need to be equipped with the permission to do so and really what those responsibilities are, and that needs to be done in tandem. And plan it out and write it down. How can we have an action plan for roles and responsibilities so that everyone is an active team member and feels like they are valued and know exactly how to support the goals and objectives of the instructional objectives as well as the team objectives. And making sure as a leader, this third component, following up with the team, is such an essential piece. Meeting and reviewing student performance with our educators, reflecting on teacher performance, providing that ongoing feedback with the action plan. So having an action plan to how do we meet that feedback is so essential as well. And here are just some resources from Project Success to help you kind of approach those pieces. There's an action plan template for co-teaching, there's co-planning templates, there's staff strengths and responsibility templates to help guide you as well. So wanted to leave you with some additional support there. And then co-teaching and working with professionals. This is just some takeaway pieces that I think are really important. Having a strong commitment to the shared work. Whether you're working with a paraprofessional or you're having a team of special educators and general educators working in tandem, having them have that strong commitment, having them have a communication plan with each other, and having that be regular and ongoing. A space and a way to share resources and decision-making and accountability. Teaching partners, and in some cases paraprofessionals, need to plan for and use a variety of instructional strategies to meet those student needs. So having that time to plan that as well. And then clearly establishing the roles and responsibilities between teaching partners, and as well as being transparent with your paraprofessionals. Here's how you support, here's your action plan, and being intentional with that. Kimberly asked in the chat box, are the tools provided on the Padlet? I probably need to go in and add those co-teaching tools, and I will do that following today's Summer Institute. I can go in and add those. So you have it all in one-stop shop. They are linked directly on the presentation, but I'll go back and do that for you so you have them all in one space. All right, and as we kind of wrap up today, wanted to just give you some tips. This is high leverage practices under collaboration for 1 through 3. And I thought these were ways that as educational leaders, we can really support our educators, new and veteran alike, special ed and general educators alike, our paraprofessionals, our related service providers, all are included in this. Ensuring that there's a common planning time. If you don't have control of the master schedule, assuring that those conversations are taking place at the district or even the school level with assistant principals as they're designing those out, or principals, whomever is responsible for that. Making sure that that master schedule is shared with everyone on the team, and making sure that that collaboration time is embedded in that. Making sure that we as leaders are amplifying that all are equal, and modeling that and assuring that that is happening. All collaborators, all co-teachers have equal value. We provide different supports and expertise, but we all need to be at the table equally. And that really goes back to our inclusive practices piece. You know, our gen ed teachers bring a wealth of subject matter expertise, and our special educators come in there with modifications and behavioral strategies. And we all have to be able to lean on each other and understand that equal value, and that those ideas are to be supported alike. Making sure that specially designed instruction, alternate standards in Indiana, they're called content connectors, and academic standards are fused into all things and in all ways. And making sure that we're presuming competence of all students first and foremost. setting up data systems, making sure we're monitoring the collaboration, communication, and planning of our teachers, and jumping in to support when we need to. So wanted to kind of pull those three pieces together, going back and revisiting our vision statement and our action plan, asking where teachers need support with those. And then keeping the small wins in front of our staff in a way that we circle back to our small wins and we celebrate them, and encouraging our staff to do the same independently of any staff or PLC meeting alike. So just thought those were great ways to just start to implement. And then lastly, these are just some reflection questions. I will add them to the Padlet so you can have those alike and have kind of your next steps there. My name is Meredith Katie Merck. This is my email address. I will add it to the chat box right now. And as I told Kimberly, we'll add those co-teaching and co-planning tools as well. But I want to just open up. We have about 2 more minutes. We'll add the evaluation into the chat box as well. If you could complete that, you'll do this with every session. That would be extremely helpful. So I'll put my email address there. I know many of you will be hopping off and joining your next session. So I want to hang out here. I will keep the chat box open. If you would do me a favor and fill out the evaluation, that's helpful for me and the team alike. And then what I encourage you to do as you kind of think through your next steps with the high leverage practices, explore the Padlet, explore the resources that are there, and really think about how these high leverage practices overlap with what your goals and objectives are for the 21-22 school year, where you could fuse them into PLCs and staff meetings, how you could really create norms and agendas and expectations for group meetings. And if you need support, we're here to help. The high leverage practices are something I'm really excited to teach in my own courses with my own students, as well as with the educators through Project Success. So I'm happy to jump in and we can explore them together. So shoot me an email if you have any questions. We have our next session starting at 10. So we'll go on ahead and sign off here. If there's any additional questions, I'll be here for about another minute. And thank you so much for your time with Project Success today. It has been a great day yesterday and already off to a great start with some great engagement and some really great thoughts and reflection on how we can implement in your own local level. So I appreciate your time today.